Hey everyone, and welcome back to the book club. What's it been about 4 or 5 months? I'd love to give you my excuse for the long time off, but there is none, so I won't bother. Today we're going to be talking about Blood Song by Anthony Ryan. This is one of those cases where I did judge a book by its cover. I had never heard of it before. I don't think I'd really even heard of Anthony Ryan before that I know of, but I just saw it in a bookstore and I read the description on the back and I was like, that sounds cool. I'll pick that up for $5, and I did. And I enjoyed it. Not without criticisms, but overall, this was a good, strong, kind of gritty military fantasy. And well, it's interesting. It's not just military fantasy. It's kind of a blend of genres. Actually, there's definitely coming of age elements in there, but maybe a bit lighter than your kind of standard hero's journey arc. And it's definitely part character study because this is not a book with multiple kind of points of view as has been popular in these post Game of Thrones Song of Ice and Fire days. No, this is definitely a protagonist novel, and it blends those kind of coming of age character study elements with the kind of, I'd call it about halfway between high fantasy and military fantasy. Actually, like there's definitely a certain amount of grittiness and tactics and managing a war kind of themes and anti-war themes, criticism of war, analyzing why we go to war, where we go to war, real world parallels in there. But there's also, there's some magic. There's not so much in the way of wizards or kind of alternate fantasy races or those kind of elements of high fantasy. No Dark Lord to be found here. There's no Gandalf figure. There's no mystical creatures really. There's extra large real world creatures like extra large wolves and extra large panthers and whatnot, but no dragons, no wyverns, no orcs, no anything like that. It keeps it all a little bit more on the realistic-ish side. But I guess I should go into kind of describing the plot a little bit. It's about a boy turned man through the course of the novel. This novel spans, I'm not sure exactly, I think it might be close to 20 years actually, in just about 600 some odd pages. It's about a boy turned man named Valen Al Sorna, son of a legendary battle lord, which is this, seems to be this book's word for general basically, who gets dropped off at a place called the Sixth Order, which is in his kingdom. It's basically the military academy, one of 6 other academies. I think one is Fifth Order, I believe, is all about healing. There's one that's all about faith, religion. But the Sixth Order happens to be the hardcore military academy, where they spend years and years training, 18 hours a day, running, fitness, sword play, horseback riding, archery, battle tactics, just drilling it over and over and over and over. They have to do tests where they fight against condemned criminals in the arena for the crowd to test their battle skills. They have to survive out in the wilderness with nothing, and they have to do various other survival tactics like that. And they just train and train and train. They do a little bit of training in blacksmithing and a little healing here and there. But this whole section of the book, it's about half the novel. I guess in a way you compare it to like a kind of gritty military take on Harry Potter or something, because they have their professors and their classmates and the dorms, and there's kind of some mysteries they work on and solve. But skipping through the years much, much more quickly than Harry Potter, obviously. I mean, I think in some cases we just skip ahead, 2 or 3 years over a paragraph. They just say, Valen and his friends trained and trained and trained, and they were sore and it hurt, but they got better. But there are excursions, into the local town, and they ran across some magical mysteries. They get into things with a bandit lord of sorts when they have to save one of their friends, and and there's kind of darker elements in there. Like one of the classmates' father is actually executed for a supposed treason against the crown, and Valen has to try to stop him before he does something stupid, And there, like I said, there's the aforementioned test of the wild, where they have to go live in kind of the frozen tundra for a week, and we kind of get into how they hunt and explore things there. I shouldn't say how they hunt, actually, because like I said, it is a protagonist novel. There is not, skipping from point of view to point of view here. There's, I think, 6 chapters that take place in the future, where we see a historian writing, interviewing, basically. It's a fantasy journalist interviewing Valen Alsorna in the future once some real heavy stuff has gone down. I guess it's the first chapter, so it's not a spoiler to say that in the future Valen is a prisoner of a war against another empire, and we see an imperial chronicler for that empire talking to him in about 6 chapters that are from that guy's point of view. But even those 6 are about Valen Alsorna top to bottom. And other than that, 95% of the novel is just from Valen's point of view. We spend it all in his head. And but anyway, about halfway through the novel, we start to kind of switch from childhood to adulthood for Valen and the other characters, and then it turns into arguably more kind of a generic. The obvious comparison would be, these days everyone talks about Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire. It turns into kind of more of a military fantasy, waging campaigns of war. It's not all kind of just one big plot at that point. There are multiple kind of adventures, I guess. Adventures is almost the wrong word, because they're a little more grim than that, but multiple military excursions we follow Valen in, rooting out rogue princes who have taken over castles after executing their own father, waging wars against other countries, hunting a bandit lord in the forest, other stuff like that. And so it's kind of it's divided into about half and half, roughly half schooling, half adult Valen becoming, legendary warrior and military leader. If I had to pick a favorite of the 2 sections, I'd probably go with more the schooling part, just because, military fantasy, I've read plenty of it, not that it's not, badly written or anything. Do have some criticisms we'll get into, but the training part is always fun. It's that effect where everyone likes the first half of Full Metal Jacket best, right? And it's the same idea. It's just amusing to watch them start out as, they start out as 10-year-old kids, I believe, at the Sixth Order, Valen and his core group of friends. Some start as rivals, but eventually friends. We watch them learn slowly but surely and master skill after skill. And, and that whole part is just kind of amusing. It's that whole military training thing. I don't know. It's just always fun to watch on screen or in a book, The comparisons I would make, everything from Full Metal Jacket, like I mentioned, to Hacksaw Ridge, to, in the lighter magical tone of things, Harry Potter, like I said. People just like to watch people learn, like to watch people go to a school that's not the school we went to, not math and history and whatnot, but in this case, swordplay and archery. And, it's just kind of always an interesting thing. Although, the later half of the book, just like another last book I discussed here in the book club, actually, The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, there's, in this one, in Bloodsong, there's definitely real-world parallels. They end up in a war that is of questionable importance, in a desert far away. You don't have to be a genius at allegory to figure out kind of where some of the commentary there comes in. And we don't necessarily hate all of the characters that Valen is up against in the war, the Empire, the other side. Actually, we don't hate a lot of them. When a large portion, the last quarter or so of the book involves kind of occupying a city, and it's very morally ambiguous, who's in the right, who's in the wrong, what's going on. And we bring in some elements of kind of warfare you might not think of in the standard fantasy novel, like plagues sweeping through the camp and whatnot. And that kind of thing it's an interesting angle. It would be hyperbolic to call the novel realistic for a few reasons I'll go into in a minute, but it has a nicely gritty tone without being totally mired in misery. There are some laughs to be had. There's a hint of romance in there, not too much. There's squabbling amongst the school boys. There's exciting action scenes. There's a few kind of more comedic characters, a few comic relief characters, like a perpetually drunk, I think it's a prince, who's kind of a bit of a scoundrel, and other stuff like that. There is magic in the novel, but it's not so much in the way of casting spells. It's more of actually the title of the novel, Bloodsong, refers to kind of what's part of the magic system in the novel, which is certain people in this world have something called the Dark. It seems to be kind of just foisted on people randomly, not unlike, the Force and Star Wars or something. And Valen is one of the people who has this, and it's frowned upon. But it's you don't cast spells with it. It's more like it involves a sort of mind reading, a sort of like a reading of the danger level that comes from people, whether people are lying or telling the truth to you. It can guide you towards goals. For Valen in particular, it can kind of guide him towards who the blood song in his mind thinks he needs to kill next to lead him towards a greater destiny. It can give visions of figures from the past. So it's a form of magic it's frequent. It comes up a lot in the novel. It comes up many, 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 many times. It's not like something that's so rare it happens once or twice in the book, but it's all in Valen's head, basically. It doesn't manifest physically. So it's a omnipresent but simultaneously subtle form of magic in the world, which is an interesting way to do it. I do think it's fair to say that the book has a cynical worldview. Oop. It has a cynical worldview that does parallel the real world in a number of ways. They're even as early as the training section, we are discussing, what happens to the not everyone who goes into the Sixth Order becomes, a warrior of the Sixth Warrior. Some people are washout, like Starship Troopers. They go down washout lane. They get a coin they get one coin for the years they've put into training there, and they're just sent out the door if they fail any one of many tests that come up along the course of the book. But then we ask, then they're just, if they pass, if they graduate, they receive this highest honor of the warrior in this kingdom. What happens is they're just sent into the grinder of war, basically, and you're not really intended to grow old if you're a warrior of the Sixth Order. What happens to the old ones? If you live to be very old and you're very lucky, then maybe you'll just go become a teacher at the Sixth Order and train the next generation of into the meat grinder of war. So it's even as far back as that, it has kind of a dark worldview. And as I mentioned, there's obviously the real world parallels towards certain permanent, possibly unjustified, sandy military engagements. These parallels aren't difficult at all to read by anyone in the second half of the book. But it doesn't necessarily have a cynical view of humanity. As we see into Valen's, mind, he doesn't buy into necessarily all the war and whatnot. As the novel goes on, it's a bell curve of sorts. He starts out not necessarily wanting to be at the Sixth Order, but he comes to kind of believe in it a little bit and believe in the ways of the faith and the king. And some of his early, military engagements are like things that are justified, like, rooting out a bandit lord, for instance. But, as it goes on, and we start to see into his mind as he becomes more disillusioned with everything that's going on. And Valen genuinely does want peace. He doesn't want innocents dead. He doesn't want to destroy the city that, a city that he might occupy. But it's a politically fraught, intense, and complicated situation that he has to weave his way out of. The stronger he gets, because, he is a mighty warrior as the book goes on. We see that from the very first chapter of the fantasy journalist describing him. We know he's a powerful, mighty, looked up to warrior and hero figure. But the more powerful he gets, in his skills with the sword, with his blood song, the more trapped he becomes with the stuff that's beyond his reach, the politics, the inextricable just web of war. And so it's interesting in that way. It's almost like the more his grasp should become mighty, the more trapped he is. So it's interesting in that way. But, we do see, real friendship and hope and love blossom among kind of the mire, which keeps the book from becoming too grim. And it's why it's only about half cynical. It's cynical in worldview, but not necessarily about people. And I think that's a good way to do it. There's criticisms, to be certain. You might notice that throughout this whole review, I've barely discussed any characters except Valen Alsorna, and there's a reason for that. Is because he is the most interesting figure. A lot of his classmates kind of blend together. A lot of his professors kind of blend together. They're all kind of grim older men, and his classmates, I wouldn't say the voices they're written with is terribly distinct. There's one classmate in particular, Canis or Canis, I don't know how to pronounce it. He's kind of defined as the more naive one, the one who has the most faith in the king and in the faith, and the faith in the faith. Which is interesting because we get to kind of contrast Valen's descending kind of feelings toward these things with Canis as the book goes on. But then there's a few other classmates, Dentos, Barcus, Norta, I think their names are. And they're almost defined more by their skills, like in like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or something. Like one is really good at archery, one is great at horses, one is a great blacksmith. But their voices sort of blend together, and there are some distinct characters that I won't get into because I don't want to go beat by beat through the whole plot, like a Sister Sharon, who's a healer who plays a very important role in Valen's story. King Janus, very important. Won't get into the details with him too much, but he's not like a character we haven't seen in fantasy before, but an interesting figure. And so, towards the last half of the novel, some characters on the Imperial side that Valen's kingdom is up against. And I would say if I have a criticism, it's definitely that some of the side characters are kind of, they're characters I would, on the A to F grading scale, I'd give about a C in terms of how dynamic and well developed and interesting they are. But Valen himself, where it counts, yeah, I mean, it's just all from his point of view, or at least about him, and it pulled me along for over 600 pages, and I was, often reading 30, 40 pages a day, so I was pretty compelled by that. So, without getting into spoilers, I will say it doesn't really build towards, an epic battle against the orcs and the Dark Lord. Certainly, it's all more bitter and morally ambiguous than that, and kind of when you're done, it leaves you with a feeling that's you've gone on a journey, and you've gone on a journey with this character in particular, but you could make an argument that it's kind of anticlimactic, but perhaps in a way that's intentional. Now, there are sequels. I'm not going to get into reading those just yet because I kind of like to mix up series when it comes to books. I mean, it's not like when I'm binging a TV show and I just go episode. When I'm doing like a book series, I like to kind of, switch in between series. That's why I didn't read the next Stormlight Archive book after reading The Way of Kings, and haven't even started that one yet, although I do have it ready to go. But so I'll probably check out the sequels to Bloodsong eventually. I've heard they're not as good, but keep an open mind. Sometimes I like stuff other people don't, and vice versa. But overall, if you're into kind of a character study, coming of age, dark, military, fantasy sort of thing, yeah, I would definitely recommend it. I thought it was well done and interesting, and maybe it kind of dips off a little, Full Metal Jacket style once we leave the military academy, but there's pretty cool parts of the second half of the book too. Just as, simple as really well done action scenes. And but I'd say the real heart of it is in the morally ambiguous situations that Valen finds himself in, where he can find his way out with the sword and the bow. He's good enough to do that, but he can't find his way around the just kind of traps that people put him in terms of, should I, does this person deserve death, or will it make things worse? Should I follow this order, or should I go against my order? Should I defect entirely from, this military order? But if I do, will that, doom other people? And it's various moral traps that he finds himself in. And that's really the kind of the secret heart of the novel that's, hidden within all the battle scenes and whatnot. So yeah, I will recommend it if it sounds like something you'd like. I think you probably will. But anyway, thanks for swinging by the old book club again. I'll try not to make it such a big gap between next time. All right. Talk to y'all later.